All right, so it seems like we got somewhat of good news coming out of the Senate right now, with Democrats apparently putting together a viable path forward for somewhat lowering prescription drug costs, even one that is supported by corporate demon Joe Manchin. So, here from Common Dreams, they say with Manchin's backing, Senate Dems unveil plan to let Medicare negotiate drug prices. So this was one of the most popular provisions that was within Build Back Better, and it seems like they're basically isolating this and watering it down to some degree, and then that is going to be what they are trying to pass forward through the Senate. So let's go ahead and get into some of the details here. They say Senate Democrats, including serial obstructionist Joe Manchin of West Virginia, have reportedly reached a deal on a plan that would allow Medicare to negotiate the prices of a small subset of prescription drugs directly with pharmaceutical companies, a change that is massively popular with voters across party lines. So again, importantly, you always got to focus in on the actual details here, because we know that no piece of legislation that Joe Manchin approves of is actually going to be big, bold structural reform. So it's going to be important to find out exactly what this small subset of prescription drugs that will fall under this purview actually are, but no surprises here that they would be going with a much more tepid approach to this, given the support from Joe Manchin. But as they point out here, this is a massively popular provision, so just to give you a perspective on that, here from KFF, they say roughly 83% of total Americans, including 95% of Democrats, 82% of independents, and even 71% of Republicans agree with lowering prescription drug prices by allowing Medicare to negotiate. So if they manage to pass this through, could be a pretty big political W for them, and obviously has massive popularity among the American people. But again, it's always important to get into the actual details of this plan. So they continue saying on Wednesday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer submitted a 190-page legislative text to the chamber's parliamentarian, an unelected official tasked with opining on whether bill provisions comply with the arcane rules of the budget reconciliation process, the process that Democrats are using to evade GOP opposition in the 60-vote filibuster rule. So many different things that we could talk about here. The 60-vote filibuster rule, completely arbitrary. It was initially pushed forward by segregationists who wanted to oppose the Civil Rights Amendment. Now it is still used. We don't even have the talking filibuster anymore. So basically you need 60 votes for any piece of legislation that is not able to be passed through the budget reconciliation process, which again has to go through this unelected bureaucrat, the Senate parliamentarian, who, just as a reminder, blocked the $15 minimum wage from being included in a previous package. And again, they have absolutely no real power. Democrats could remove this person, they could fire them, they could replace them, they could simply ignore them. And so, depending on the ruling here from the parliamentarian, Democrats will be moving forward with this legislation unless this parliamentarian just comes out and decides that it's not under the purview of the budget reconciliation process. And if Democrats actually listen to that advice, then that would be massively embarrassing and pathetic, but we'll have to wait and see on that. And they continue here saying the new text largely resembles the drug pricing plan that the House of Representatives passed in November as part of a much broader Build Back Better package, which Manchin tanked just a month later with the help of Kyrsten Sinema, of course. And she's going to be obviously a massive figure in this. We know that Kyrsten Sinema accepted almost $1 million from big pharmaceutical corporations, basically bribes. And so whether or not she is going to be willing to sign on to this, I guess, is yet to be seen. But honestly, I highly doubt it. If it's going to be something that is substantially tackling the problem of gigantic for-profit pharmaceutical companies price gouging the American people, I really highly doubt that Kyrsten Sinema would be on board with that. So, what are the actual provisions that are in this? How far will it go? What will be the potential impacts of this? So they say in its current form, Senate Democrats' drug pricing plan would cap Medicare recipients out-of-pocket prescription medicine costs at $2,000 a year. So $2,000 a year. So that's what the cap is going to be for Medicare recipients. So first of all, how many people are Medicare Part D recipients, which is what covers prescription drugs? So here from KFF, they say in 2021, 48 million Medicare beneficiaries are enrolled in Medicare Part D plans. So 48 million Americans is roughly what this provision would apply to. And then you get to the average costs for those on Medicare Part D. And they say here from the Congressional Budget Office that average payments on a yearly basis are roughly $2,700. So you're talking about applying this provision to 48 million out of 320 million Americans, a very small subset. And also, you're only taking it down from an average cost of $2,700 per year to $2,000 per year. So $700 a year in savings for the American people. That's roughly, like $60 a month. So again, from my perspective as a socialist political commentator, obviously I believe we should fully nationalize the pharmaceutical industry. Already we have institutions like the National Institute for Health in the United States that largely fund the production and research of a lot of these pharmaceuticals in the first place. Then you have gigantic billion-dollar for-profit pharmaceutical companies who basically buy up the patents, monopolize the production and distribution of these drugs, and then price gouge the American people. And so, if that's the underlying dynamic, my solution would be nationalize big pharma, completely eliminate the profit motive, and treat pharmaceuticals similar to how I believe that healthcare should be treated as a human right. So, $2,000 a year as a cap in payments, I think it should be $0 a year, but nonetheless, this is, marginal improvements around the edges of this. So, $700 a year, $60 a month in savings. It's not nothing, but it also doesn't go nearly far enough, in my opinion. But they continue down here saying the pharmaceutical industry, whose Capitol Hill lobbyists outnumber members of Congress, just completely grotesquely corrupt with our political system here. But they outnumber members of Congress, and they have aggressively fought such changes as it continues to push up prices for life-saving medicines. And a study published last month in the medical journal JAMA estimated that nearly half of all new brand name prescription medicines launched in the US in 2020 and 2021 came with an original annual price tag of $150,000 or more. And just to give you an overall perspective in terms of how the American people are getting ripped off, even relative to other comparable OECD nations. So here from Health Systems Tracker, if you just look at this line of per capita prescribed medicine spending between 2004 and 2009, I mean, consistently, the United States is way above every other developed country. You can compare us to Germany, Japan, Canada, Switzerland, France, Australia, all these other different countries that have significantly lower prescription drug costs. And the reason for that, or a large reason for that, is because their governments have decided that they will negotiate with these pharmaceutical companies and won't simply allow them to engage in basically price setting and price fixing schemes in order to price gouge their constituencies. But here in the United States, we don't have that unless something like this was actually passed. So they did include down here that other provisions within this, not just the capping it at $2,000 a year part of it, but that they are also going to penalize drug companies that raise prices at a faster rate than inflation. Kind of, obviously a better situation to tie it to inflation, but nonetheless, that is not going nearly far enough. And I'll show you a comparison with Bernie Sanders' plan that gives a better policy proposal than tying it to inflation. But they will also allow Medicare to negotiate and, if applicable, renegotiate maximum fair prices for a limited number of costly drugs beginning in 2023. So again, you see the unnecessary austerity that is being imposed on this type of a program. You're capping it at $2,000 a year. It should be $0 a year. You're tying it to inflation. You could be tying it to, for example, as Bernie Sanders wants to do, tie it to the cost in other comparable nations like Canada. You could also allow us to buy a lot of these drugs from outside countries like Canada that have lower drug costs in an effort to pressure them to lower their prices. And again, you're also putting this cap here on, renegotiating maximum fair prices for a limited number of costly drugs. I don't understand how you could possibly look at this situation and say, we're going to apply it to XYZ drug because essentially people are being price gouged for that life-saving medicine, but we're not going to apply it to all of these other various drugs that people are also being price gouged on. So clearly this bill has its many, many limitations, and just to give you a perspective in terms of what Bernie Sanders wanted to do, so here are his three main points in his proposal. The Prescription Drug Price Relief Act, which would peg the price of prescription drugs in the United States to the median price in 5 major countries, including Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Japan. So again, you see the difference between tying this to inflation, which is already, giving the premise basically that it is arbitrarily raised above what every other country is paying, versus tying it to the median price within these other countries. I think this would be a much superior plan here. Also, the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Act, which would direct the Secretary of Health and Human Services to negotiate lower prices for prescription drugs under Medicare Part D. So again, seems like this is much more broad scope than the bill that is being put forward in the Senate right now. And finally, the Affordable and Safe Prescription Drug Importation Act, which would allow patients, pharmacists, and wholesalers to import safe, affordable medicine from Canada and other major countries. So listen, it seems like if this ends up passing, it would be something that could be, a good thing, but does it go nearly far enough? No, obviously not. I mean, I don't think anybody could possibly reasonably believe at this point that somebody like Joe Manchin, somebody like Kirsten Sinema are genuinely acting in good faith and want to see substantially lower costs for prescription drugs for average Americans. They're both bought and controlled, just like many other Democrats are, by the big pharmaceutical companies, by the health insurance industries. And so obviously this bill has its many limitations and doesn't go nearly far enough, but nonetheless, if they manage to get this done, could help out some people. You'd be saving, again, roughly like $60 a month on average. So obviously that could have some impact, a positive impact on some people's lives, but whether or not this is actually going to address the underlying problem of having the profit motive existing within a healthcare industry at all, obviously it's not going to be doing that. So it's somewhat of a good thing, but obviously doesn't go nearly far enough in tackling the corruption of our political system and tackling the power of these massive billion-dollar profitable pharmaceutical companies that are price gouging the American people.